Welcome to THINKpod. My name is Francisco.
And I'm Aziz, and at ThinkPod, we speak about the smartest ideas and the biggest challenges facing the world right now. We speak about where we are, how we got here, and where we're going.
Our guest for this episode of ThinkPod is Courtney Powell, COO of 500 Global. We discuss how she spots opportunity and talent in early stage startups and the advice she gives for early stage entrepreneurs. And finally, we ask, what can the investment sector do to be more inclusive and diverse? First question is, how do you spot talent in early stage founders?
That's a wonderful question, and maybe to give a little bit of context for where my answer will be coming from. We're a global investment firm that's making investments across 90 countries, and we've been doing so for going into our 11th year now. So for us, this is really the crux of what we're doing, is trying to identify talent globally as early as possible, and coming in and looking for ways to support that talent, primarily through investment into their companies. But we also run a number of other programs and have a broader platform to support the development of the emerging ecosystems that we're operating in.
So Courtney, in my opinion, you're kind of the face of the 500 Global. We see you everywhere representing the company, talking about it on social media, in live events. How has that transition been for you personally? That entrepreneurial transition from a very small family to a global behemoth almost at this stage?
Yes, so I first came to know 500 in 2011, so about a year after it was co-founded by Christine Tsai, who's our CEO globally. And I was very fortunate to have Christine and 500 invest in one of the companies that I started. And I actually went through the flagship accelerator in San Francisco. So having received investment from 500 and really getting to benefit from the quality of that accelerator in the program, it literally changed my life. Right? I went from coming from a market in Texas, which had at the time a very small startup scene, to getting global exposure through the 500 network. Now come back, however many years later, 9 or 8 years later, when I became COO of 500, the journey has been incredible. I feel just absolutely fortunate every single day to be able to do what I love, which is broaden the 500 platform and make sure we can invest in more founders around the world.
Where did you find that passion? Like, in terms of your entrepreneurial journey, Isis and I have a similar background. What was the catalyst for you to start making that leap of faith?
Mm-hmm. I joined my first startup when I was 19, and At the time it was 2 other gentlemen and myself, and I had no exposure to startups or business. I just knew that I wanted to be in business. And what I saw was the ability for those 2 in particular, who were already in their mid-30s, they had a yellow notepad, I'll never forget, and talking about the technology that they were going to build. And then fast forward 5 years later, the company had already raised, I think, almost 50 million in capital and eventually was acquired. And seeing that idea go from the piece of paper to what it is today, still as a business, it just changed the way I thought. And then I think it really gave me the confidence to be able to go and start my own companies and to be able to raise my own capital. And again, just coming back to having spent time on the entrepreneurship side of the world and feeling like the contribution that I could make through 500 would be so significant.
Absolutely.
That it made sense for me to kind of give up my own entrepreneurial journey and use all that energy to help scale the 500 platform.
So Courtney, you have a very interesting transition there. I think a lot of entrepreneurs go on to become investors of one sort or another. But how did your experience with the program at 500 Global shape the way you're shaping the company to be in the future?
I think, going back to the time that I went through the 500 program back in 2011, 2012, but the value add, I would say, was pretty limited in terms of expectations at that time. Now, fast forward to today, and you see venture firms like 500 or Andreessen or Sequoia or any of the other big names really wanting to provide a full platform of support. So it's education for the founder, it's talent for the founder, it's helping them to have playbooks to launch into other markets. And 500 is really focused on helping our regional investments scale globally. That's a big component of what we do. Providing adequate training, not just at the seed stage through our accelerator, but even with pre-Series A programs. And we've now recently started investing all the way even to pre-IPO. So as a capital platform, we're looking to really support the founder from their very first check all the way to their exit.
Well, so one question that emerges from that is, with the abundance of capital now in the markets, are investors really competing on the in-kind services? And how does that differ from one region to the other? Are some regions more challenging in your opinion?
In terms of Silicon Valley, certainly capital is absolutely a commodity. And the ability to deploy capital is no longer what's going to get you in a deal. Founders in the Valley who are not just Americans, but of course have come from all over the world, and that's what's made the Valley such an incredible place. They're looking for sector-specific investors who are going to come in, be able to go deep with them in crypto, go deep with them in e-com, or whatever it is that they're focusing on. So certainly you need expertise. You need to be able to bring in that downstream capital or help them to fill out their rounds as well. So it's not just about your ability to deploy capital. And then more than anything, and I think this is the ethos that we really want to bring into emerging markets, is you have to have the founders back. And many investors, especially in global markets, do not yet understand that. You have a limited number of investors operating in smaller markets, and so they're able to really write the rules for founders. And we're not a fan of this, and really like to come in and treat the founders as best as we can to ensure that they have other opportunities. They don't have to take poor terms. They don't have to suffer from ill treatment. That there's going to be somebody there who's going to treat them with the respect that they deserve.
So you've spoken previously about some of the companies you've gone from zero up to $50 million raises. What were some of the key learning curves that you've had personally, and what advice would you give to an early stage founder?
Yeah, so thinking back to that very first company where I was their first employee, I very distinctly remember sitting in the first meeting and the CEO mentioning the term ROI, and I had to go back to my computer and look up what ROI meant. I mean, I just had no basis. I didn't understand. So certainly, I think for that experience, it was really just trying to understand the basic dynamics of business and also of the interpersonal communications, especially when you go from a small startup to a larger company. There's just a lot that you have to learn to navigate. Now, when I went on to start my own companies, that certainly was a big lesson in leadership. Just you have to be able to recruit, you have to be able to set a vision. I once heard that as a founder, what's the most critical thing is to set the vision and keep money in the bank. And I think that still holds
Amen,
true.
yeah.
So I'd say in my own companies, that's really what I learned. Now, after I was CEO of a few companies, I became the head of corporate development for Keller Williams Realty International, which is the largest consumer real estate company in the world. And I focused on building their consumer products and eventually went into corporate development, which is where I got a taste for investment. They had a family office that was looking at investing in other real estate tech companies. So it was at that point that I started to learn more about the financial aspects of how limited partners are looking at funds, how funds are looking at deals. And as I've come to 500, what I've really had to learn is scale. 500 operating, we have offices in 20 countries, we're investing in 90 countries. We've made almost 2,700 investments.
Wow.
And we have 34, 35, 36 unicorns already across our portfolio. So that level of scale and running a firm of this size is really, something that I'm still working on. So communication, super critical. The ability to manage stakeholders, not just within the firm, but of course we work really closely with governments and with investors from around the world. So it's a different level of leadership, no doubt.
I feel like you've done that difficult transition from being an entrepreneur to going back to the corporate world multiple times. How is that transition like for you? What were the challenges there, just the freedom that you had to give up to go back to a more structured environment?
Yeah, I mean, I do remember when I first went to work for KW and I got my first paycheck and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't have to raise this money. And that was really something. There was a lot of relief for me in the sense that I had been just so focused and so on the ropes, as all founders are, for over a decade. So having that, I think, 2 or 3 year break helped me to just go back into operating and just have a much broader view. All of a sudden, I had been running real estate tech companies. So all of a sudden, I was no longer looking at my own company, but I was seeing an entire industry. And that vantage point really helped me to know that when you're a founder and you're speaking with an investor, you just have this micro view. And the one of the things that investors are most helpful for is to be able to broaden that view.
Absolutely.
And that's something of value.
One of the key issues, I think, from a founder is obviously raising capital. And with that, the scale of investments, we've seen in the industry 1% of founders are African American, for example. What are some ways that at 500 Global that you're trying to be more inclusive, to bring in new founders? Obviously going to emerging markets is one way, but could you talk about some of the ways you're looking to kind of tap into?
I distinctly remember meeting Christine for the first time in 2011. She was the first female VC I'd ever met.
Wow.
And the other thing that I remember is that we had a nursing room, or I say we, it wasn't me at the time, but 500 had a nursing room. And I remember thinking that that was really interesting because I had never seen a nursing room in a business, like let alone at a VC in Silicon Valley. So right from the beginning, 500 was focused on investing in underrepresented areas and individuals. And we've published all of our stats that we like to share with the public to keep ourselves accountable for the level of investment that we're making into women, into underrepresented minorities, and of course around the world. So for us, we're built with diversity in mind. Our management team is half female, which is also a very unique element of what we do, especially as VCs. We focus not only on investing in founders around the world, but we also have a part of our business called VCU. And within VCU, which stands for Venture Capital Unlocked, we train emerging fund managers. And this is really critical because we want to see emerging fund managers come from all backgrounds. And so we're able to know what sort of managers obviously we're selecting for their program, that they're going to go back into their home countries or even within the United States, and that we've helped to kind of shape the journey of other funds. So these issues, whether representation at the VC level or of course at the investment level, we want to see both really addressed.
I think one of the key elements in the States especially, I think there's been a lot of desire to have more Black founders. I think there's been a huge underrepresentation there. Are there any specific strategies that you're embracing to basically promote that and make it more inclusive for that specific minority?
Yeah, I can't recall who tweeted this, but this phrase has really stuck with me, which was hire or wire. I think there was a belief set, not just in Silicon Valley, that perhaps offering mentorship to Black founders and to other underrepresented minorities was enough. And the hire or wire statement was really meant to illustrate that you have to write checks.
Yeah.
Our contribution, the way that we can help an individual founder or a company or an underrepresented community forward is by writing checks. And so for us, it's about having bias training, for example, within our entire team, not just our investment team. We have programs specifically for Black founders and other underrepresented minorities. I think it's really critical that you have representation in terms of the VCs who are actually writing the checks. There's been plenty of studies that show that if you are a minority investor, you're likely to ask different questions to the founders, versus if you don't have that personal experience, right? It removes a bias from your decision making. So all of these things are really critical, but that hire and wire phrase really sticks with me as needing to be action oriented.
What do you feel that the industry as a whole can do to be more inclusive, following your leadership, for example?
I do think that actually addressing the fact that there is an issue is one very important step. I think it's really easy to believe or to feel that because you're not personally impacted by bias that it doesn't exist. We know that's not true. So certainly I think, there's the mentality of providing training, for your teams, for your investment teams, for hiring underrepresented individuals to make investment decisions. I think really looking at the decision-making process that's going on, like in our case, we had an outside firm come in and assess how we were doing, from a diversity standpoint and make some recommendations for us. So I think that objectivity is really important. It's easy to drink your own Kool-Aid. So I think it's important, to have that objectivity. If you look at our portfolio, for example, you look at other, incredible funds out there that are really doing even more than what we are from a diversity standpoint by specifically targeting underrepresented minority groups. I think that those are fantastic models to follow. We happen just to take a very diverse approach generally, so we're not sector specific.
Right.
Our model is essentially, broad investment.
You've been passionate about promoting young founders. What are some key barriers that you've found for first stage founders, for example?
Yeah, I think in terms of barriers, there is certainly an element of what's popular in terms of startup culture and VC culture, which is, You have to have gone to Stanford. You have to be a male. You have to be, a certain ethnic group, whatever it is. There's this trope that exists for what makes a successful founder. And just think, it's hard enough to start a company if you're not fighting the memes, right, that are out there. So I think as a young founder, it's really important to surround yourself with other founders because you need people to be able to give you guidance. Being a founder is a very lonely state of existence. I mean, I sometimes people are like, don't say that. I'm like, it's true. And so you really have to find that community to be able to support you and go on that learning path with you. And I don't think you have to have a particular education with regard to becoming a founder. I think, what's really important is really just having exposure, right? And having a point of view and an opinion and a solution that you want to see brought to the world, and then being crazy enough to pursue it.
What are some key ways that, at least personally, I found obviously being a founder incredibly challenging? What are some strategies that you found to be, finding that work-life balance, but still hitting those aggressive milestones?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always struggle when I hear work-life balance because I feel that the reality of being a founder is that there is very limited work-life balance. Yeah. And I think it's actually really important to talk about that. I have 4 children and, I had children when I was founding companies, and certainly it makes it very, very difficult, and there are trade-offs for focusing on something as passionately as you need to as a founder. Now, that being said, I think it's really important to find companions along this journey. From the VC community, one of the things that I've seen is more support for mental health awareness. There's a fund in Silicon Valley, I think it's called Freestyle, and one of the things that they championed was providing mental health support, for all the founders that they were investing in. I think having a coach, a CEO coach, an executive coach, a life coach, whatever you need to call it, somebody there to help you find whatever balance looks like for you is also super critical. And then I would say finally, there's times that you just need to say, look, I know I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders, and maybe it feels like I can't step away for a day or 2 days or a week, but for your own health, I think you have to be willing to take a break.
So Courtney, you went through quite a journey there. You managed to balance work and life. Did you struggle throughout that journey? Were there any low points or tough points? Did you have any mental health challenges that you had to go through that you can empathize with people that are going through that journey right now and perhaps deliver a message to them?
Shutting down my first startup was really difficult. It was the startup that 500 invested in, and I remember writing the email to my investors, and it was a very long email, and I was just trying to explain all the reasons why I wanted to make this decision, and it was gut-wrenching. And I remember getting a response back from one of the investors who were like, it's all right, you'll do it again. It's just, we all go through this. And it was just, 1 or 2 lines, but I remember thinking, okay, maybe if this very famous person is telling me, that it's okay and they've all been through failure and you just have to keep going, that maybe, I could keep going. So I took some time off. I watched Grey's Anatomy on repeat, and then I got back on the horse. So I think there's a grieving period anytime you're going through, certainly shutting a company down before you have to get going again. I've definitely relied on exercise as a way for me to just blow off steam when I'm feeling the anxiety. I think there's really crushing anxiety that comes with being a founder or even leading, a global organization. So I think being able to acknowledge that you're feeling, that anxiety, or as my executive coach says, you have to name what you're feeling. I think many founders are incredibly cerebral people, and you want to think away the feelings that you're experiencing. Right. So they're always telling me, no, you have to name what you're feeling. You have to say what you're feeling. I don't want to give other founders advice, but I think it's really more about just being aware that everybody else also feels the struggle. It's all right to talk about it, and it's all right to ask for help, and it's all right to not know what to do.
So we're going to close on one question. What personal legacy are you looking to leave behind?
Well, that's quite a question.
I know.
Personal legacy. We spent time refining exactly what the mission meant for the partners at 500. And the way we articulate that is uplifting people and economies around the world through entrepreneurship. And that's really what we're after. And that aligns 100% to my personal mission, which I believe that investing in great people is a true contribution to society. that is the way we will see societies advance. You want jobs, you want economic advancement, all of these things come through entrepreneurship. And so everything we can do to support founders, to help other stakeholders kind of clear the path for founders to be able to do their thing, that's what we're here for. So just really excited and looking forward to really seeing more and more startups be built and of course thrive.
It was an absolute delight to have you, Courtney. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Yes, thank you both very much. I'm really honored to be here and excited to see how this platform continues to grow.
We would love you to let others know about this podcast. So please rate us, leave us a comment, and share with someone who might enjoy it too.
And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on our next episode.